Good to go, right. Well, welcome to the meeting of the Joint Standards Committee on the 23rd of January 2025. We have apologies from absence from Councillor Rowley and also from Councillor Chambers. Any other apologies? I think everybody else is here, aren't they? Okay. Any declarations of interest? No? Okay, good. And exclusion of the press and public, to consider the exclusion of the press and public from the meeting for the consideration of exempt annexes A and B for agenda item 10, the monitoring report in respect of complaints received on the grounds it's likely to contain information which was likely to reveal the identity of the individuals. Right, we're on to the minutes. No, okay.
Agreement.
Oh, agreement on the first one. Sorry, I'm rattling ahead. Do stop me. Right, okay. Move on to the minutes. First of all, to approve and sign the minutes of the Joint Standards Committee held on the 12th of November. If those of you were there, agree to that, yeah? And also to approve the minutes of the subcommittees, which was the Joint Standards hearing held on the 12th of November. We've got agreement on those? For those of them. All right, on to item 6, public participation. There is no registered speakers. And obviously just the usual health and safety warning on webcasting, which is keep your papers, the pink bits, well hidden while we're doing the webcast so no one can see any of the confidential information. I don't have any urgent business, so we'll move on to item 8, the open consultation on strengthening the standards and conduct framework for local authorities in England. Francis, would you like to introduce this?
Thank you, Chair. This report simply brings to the committee's attention the fact that which probably already come to your attention, but the fact that the long-awaited consultation on strengthening the standards framework is live. It's live until the 26th of February. The options presented in the report are for you to debate, discuss, and produce a collective response or not. That's in addition to you doing private responses as individuals if you so wish. But if there is to be a corporate response, the proposal is that this committee is the appropriate place to come to an agreement about what that response should be. And we have a Word version of the online survey, which could be completed after discussion. I can take a note of that and submit an online response on your behalf if that is the committee's choice. Other than that, the consultation, I think, speaks for itself, and it has probably been something that you've all already given some thought to.
Thank you, Francis. Michael.
Thank you, Francis. Does any response have to go via full council? Because obviously we haven't got a full council before the end of the consultation period. And who would ultimately sign it off? Would it go from the chief operating officer, from the chair of joint standards, or from the leader of the council? Who has overall responsibility for any contribution that we may or may not choose to submit?
Through you, Chair, then yes, I did look this up at the time of writing the report, and paragraph 8, it would be something for the monitoring officer, the chair, to consult with the leader, relevant executive member and chief operating officer to sign off any corporate response. It doesn't need to go to full council.
Sorry, can I just ask a supplementary question? Now, this sounds really stupid. But am I the executive member for this? In which case, should I absent myself?
Through you, Chair, I think that's probably a matter for discussion as between yourself and the leader. I don't think that's completely clear from the scheme of member responsibilities as written. I don't think it's expressly within that. So I think I'm looking for some unwritten agreement behind what is expressed in writing as to where you think that sits. It might be that we could leave it entirely with the leader. That's not a very satisfactory response, but that I did look at the scheme delegations at the time, asked myself the same question. conclusive response.
In which case, Chair, just to be on the safe side, I will declare that as a potential conflict and will absent myself from this agenda item.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Joe?
Chair, in a way, I don't think Michael should do that. And the reason for my saying that is this is not a statutory activity. This is a consultation around the system. And for one senior member of the council with a lot of experience to say, I'm worried about the formality of conflict of interest or whatever, as an outsider, it doesn't seem that's the best way of getting all of the contributions. Admittedly, I'm not quite sure whether a corporate contribution would work well, because would it be a consensus answer? But I do think writing yourself out, you may think they have to statutorily or whatever, but I don't think it would be the best way of determining, or at least sit in and listen at the very least.
Councillor Runciman?
Thank you, Chair. It's customary not to be able to make a decision twice. That's well established, and I think that's why Michael said what he did, and I think he's right. Sitting and listening to the debate without joining in and without being involved in the final decision, I think, would be acceptable, but not making a decision twice.
Thank you. Anyone else? Francis?
Chair, through you, I would simply say clearly it's a personal matter for the member as to whether they declare an interest or not.
In which case, Chair, if we could record in the minutes that I have at the beginning of the meeting, notwithstanding the fact that it was subsequent to that, declared that this has a potential conflict of interest, and that, yes, I'm more than happy to listen in the debate, but I won't contribute. I won't contribute any part to the conclusions that this committee might come to.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Anyone else? Any other questions before we go any further? No? Francis? So where do we go from here?
So I think the committee first need to decide whether they wish to submit a collective response. If they do, they have to go through the questions one by one, discuss and have me make a response. And they can simply decide not to do a collective response. That's, you know, I think that's stage one. Does the committee wish to come?
So do we want a collective
Yeah.
response, or do we want to do individual? Sorry,
Yeah,
Dan.
I was waiting until we debated what Michael was going to do. I think not of the four scenarios that Francis has given us. I mean, not at all. I think would be ridiculous that we didn't comment. I understand that we can. For instance, my parish is going to respond to this, but we can do it as individuals as well as. It would seem to me that collectively on behalf of the council in consultation with the leader and the chief operating officer, however, as a joint standards committee, should we not be feeding into that response, if that makes sense? So I think we could go C or D, because D is individually and collectively, but I just wanted a bit of clarification that, yeah, we could sit here today and go through every single question and then submit our views to either, presumably to the leader and the chief operating officer, or just leave it for people to individually do it. So I'm a bit confused in the sense of we should respond, but I think I would, for instance, I've been going through it, and there are certain questions I think that could be a bit controversial. I think a lot of it is non-controversial. You know, I think the thing about sanctions, for instance, I would suspect most of us will probably agree. I'm new to the committee, so I've not been party to a lot of particularly the subcommittees. So I think collectively on behalf of the council in consultation with the leader and the chief operating officer would be the way forward. But we need a way for this standards committee to feed into whatever the response is. If that makes sense, and forgive me if it doesn't.
No, thank you. Carol?
I think Frances made it clear at the beginning, and I was grateful to her, that we can send a response from the committee, which we should do. We are the Standards Committee. We are involved in it far more than anybody else. And then we can send individual responses if we want to. And I'd like to stick with that suggestion of Frances.
Thank you. Tony?
Thank you. I've served on the Standards Committee now since 2019, and I have bemoaned on many occasions the lack of sanctions, lack of teeth this committee has. There have been a number of occasions where I've seen far more serious sanctions imposed, which haven't been within our powers. And I think it's critically important, as the people who've had most experience of dealing with standards complaints, that we do put a submission forward to the senior officers to actually consider.
Thank you. Joe?
I could say that there would be consensus on most of the questions. There might be one or two questions where there might be strongly held alternative views. And I suggest where there's consensus, life is easy. You tick the box and off you go. Where there are alternative views, I think it would be sensible to reflect them in some way, because you're meant to respond. You don't necessarily have to say, on this question, this is what the organisation says. It would be possible to say, on this question, there are some slightly different views within the organisations, but they tend to be within these 2 or 3 items. But the worst thing you could do is say, right, here is what we're going to put down as absolute reply. Because actually, in a way, the answer to one question often modifies the answer that you give to a subsequent question on this. You know, it says, do you want to do A, B, C, or D? Well, actually, in some cases, in my view, well, it depends. It depends what you decided on an earlier question. And that was the nature of my individual response, which I've already given to Frances, that I assumed I might be more draconian than some people within the authority would be. Not that some members on this committee would be, in my view, because I think quite a lot of the long-term members on this committee have got some views about certain things needing to be strengthened, and probably also the view, because of their experience, that one size doesn't fit all. So they might think it was an alternative in this situation compared to that situation. So I would just caution against trying to say every question has to be answered. This is the agreed answer, because the very nature of a consultation is, you know, it's a bit awkward.
Frances, yeah.
Not to delay the discussion, but just to try to answer Councillor Breen's earlier point. In consultation with the Chief Operating Officer and the leader is the way the scheme of delegation is phrased as to who has responsibility to respond to a consultation. In practical terms, it is the Joint Standards Committee here who will debate the responses, choose a response by consensus between them. If when that consultation occurs with the leader and the Chief Operating Officer, I note that there are free text boxes in most of the responses. So were the leader and the Chief Operating Officer to say, well, actually you consulted with me and I think your response is different to what I'd say, there's actually an opportunity in practical terms to reflect both. So I think you are capturing the response of the Joint Standards Committee. If there is a radically different attitude for those who have to, under the scheme of delegations, be consulted on submission of a consultation response, then that can be reflected also.
Thank you, Frances. Right. Any other questions before we start? Trying to put some meat on the bone, as it were. No? Right. So what do we want to put in our submission? No, Martin likes to lead things, but I like to get the feel of the floor. I like to bring the opinions together, so do not be afraid to speak. Tony?
Are we going to go through the questions one by one? Because I think that's the best way to do
Yeah,
it.
we can do that, yeah.
And just see if there's a consensus. If there isn't, we could say there was no consensus.
Right, so question 2, do you think the government should be prescribed a mandatory minimum code of conduct for local authorities? Yes, no, and if not, if no, why not? Yes, I'd hope so on that one. Right, question 3, if yes, do you agree there should be a scope for local authorities to add a mandatory minimum code of conduct to reflect specific local challenges? And then you've got yes, it's important that local authorities have flexibility to add to the prescribed code. No, a prescribed code should be uniform across the country. And then there's the unsure option.
I would go for a uniform one.
Okay. Yeah, that seems to be, so no on that one then. Right, question 4. Do you think the government should set out a code of conduct requirement for members to cooperate in investigations into code breaches? Yes.
Yes.
Yes, make our life a lot easier. Okay. Right, moving on to question 5. Does your local authority currently maintain a standards committee? Well, yes. Otherwise, we're all just wasting our time on Saturday this afternoon. Question 6. Should all principal authorities be required to form a standards committee? Yes. And question 7. In most principal authorities, code of conduct complaints are typically submitted in the first instance to the local authority monitoring officer to triage. I always got to be careful when I go over the page. And to triage before referring a case to full investigation. Should all alleged code of conduct breaches be referred for investigation be heard by the relevant principal authority standards committee? Yes. Okay.
I think full council's got plenty of other things to do than to deal with
Yes.
standards complaints.
Just a bit, yes. Right, question 8. Do you agree that the independent person and co-opted members should be given voting rights?
Well, I would say no, but I don't know what their opinion is.
Right,
Because one feels a bit like this.
microphone.
Means if you are an independent member and you are there as part of the wall decoration, i.e. people will look at what you said, but they don't actually have to take any notice of it, and you have no ability to say more firmly. Now, I'm all sweetness and light normally, but I would like the theoretical option to have a stronger position to say, I want my formal disagreements, to be minuted and noted as a member of the committee, not as Burke, we have to allow to sit at the meetings, but they don't matter. I'm describing things in a rather, widely drawn and overstated manner. But I think if you invite somebody to be part of a committee, technically it's much better if you make them part of the committee.
Thank you, James. Councillor Ken.
I second that. I think for objectivity and for legitimacy, we need to actually listen to and recognise the importance of lay people who are making decisions, because they reflect the person on the street, the resident, and that's what we're all here for.
Thank you. Rose.
I'm leaning towards the other view, thinking that the elected members are the elected members and it's their democratic purpose to make the decisions, and it's our role, as I see it, to support and contribute to that. But in terms of the final decision, as elected members, I think that I'm more comfortable with that sitting with them.
Okay, thank you, Rose. Anyone else? Tony.
Thank you. I value enormously the input of the independent members, and I listen to what they say very, very carefully. It does significantly influence my judgment, because they have no axe to grind whatsoever. They give a fair and impartial view, but I think voting rights should be restricted to elected members. I hear what Mr. Lee says. Sorry, Joe, you don't mind me calling it. And I take your point that it does sometimes feel like you're a spare part, but please rest assured we do listen very, very carefully to your views, and they influence our decisions.
Thank you, Tony. Anyone else? Michael?
Not allowed to speak.
Of course you're not. Ignore. Sorry, you look so lonely there for a second. I tend to agree with Councillor Fisher. I think the elected members should have the final decision on these things. But I'm assuming that you're on about both city and parish.
Yes,
just wanted to clarify before we move forward. Right, so are we on agreement that it's the elected decisions of the elected and elected members only on voting rights?
The point I'm making. is if you get
Sorry.
consensus- If you get consensus, it's straightforward. But if you're writing what the responses are, there's a majority, but not a consensus. Now that your normal position is to go for voting, but this is an informator, not a decision. It's not going to be our decision at the end of the day. You're merely informing a process. And there are two independent people who are taking opposite views to one another. There are 3 councils of expression of opinion. One has had one view and 2 have had a different view among the city, and 1 parish councillor and a city councillor who's also a parish councillor having that view. But it is this difficulty that how do you respond to if you go for the majority as the decision, you're treating it as a straightforward voting process, which I don't think an informative is.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Carol.
Thanks. We do have independent people on other committees, and I don't think those independent people have a vote on them. I think A&G has one, and there's somebody else, isn't there? And I can't remember who it is, but I'm quite certain they don't have a vote. And so I would rather not create a precedent here, which causes an argument elsewhere.
Okay. Councillor Kent, sorry.
Thank you. I'd also like, alongside Joe, to reflect a difference of opinion. I think we need to decide it because I think we're going to have that as we go forward. So whether we're feeding back as a simple majority or able to give a more balanced view, and just saying unsure feels a bit difficult because it's not very helpful or informative. So although there's no free text here, I would, if there's a way of just adding a line saying there was a different, even if you record the difference in numbers of votes for and against, I'd like us to record that. And I do understand the point about precedent. I think there's something unique about standards, which is different. I think matters of audit and governments I can see a different argument. I don't think this does set a precedent because of the unique place of the standard and normally it's a bit like a jury trial. The jurors are there as people to be lay arbiters of behaviour. And I think for me, that's important in this particular committee, which is why I hold the view I do.
Thank you.
A vote then, so to take a vote on what the positions were,
Right.
and then try to find a way to incorporate a narrative response as well as my suggestion.
Okay, right. So we're going to try and find a way around this. So we're going to have a vote on whether we go for independent and co-opted members beginning voting rights as well as the elected members. And if that falls, then obviously we have a vote on just elected members. So those in favour of having everybody on the committee?
I'm a bit confused.
No, yeah.
I think we just vote on do IPs have a, should
Yes.
IPs
Yeah, right,
have
okay,
a,
so
have a
we'll do it.
voting right, yes or no, and a reminder that the IPs don't have a voting right on that response.
Right, okay. So we'll have a vote on whether independent person should be a vote on what's on question 8. But obviously the independent people don't have a vote on this actual vote, if that makes
right.
sense. Yeah. So those in favour of,
Should I explain that?
yeah, I think, yeah. Yeah, me.
So Councillor Runciman is correct. The independent persons are not voting members of the committee. So in terms of choosing the response of the committee, the majority will be a majority of members. In terms of inputting a narrative into that box, whether there will be a free text catch-all at some point in the form that I am more than happy to exploit to expand the view, including that the independent persons who did not vote on the response were actually mixed in their views. But if you want to report where the majority lies, as well as, you know, putting unsure.
Just to say that you could actually cover that under question 10. If you look at question 10, you can put it in there.
Should IPs be given
Right.
a vote?
So those in favour of IPs having a vote, show now.
IPs should
For
vote.
independent persons to have a vote. Those in favour, I've got Councillor Kent, Councillor Breen, any more?
Yourself?
No.
No. Okay.
2. Those against?
Okay.
3. Lost. Thank you. Right, on to question 9, I think. That's where we're at. Should standards committees be chaired by the independent person? Yes, no, or unsure?
I think the question is it a committee of the council? If it's a committee of the council, it needs chairing by a councillor. If it isn't, then it could be an independent person. But I wouldn't say should, I would be saying could. But I'd like the first question answered first.
Right, okay. Sorry, Tony.
I think they could be. I think any member of the committee should be entitled to chair it, whether they're a voting member or not.
Okay. Anyone else? Chair.
Could I just make the point about a proportion of the committee who are voting members of the committee are not members of the statutory authority on which the decision is being made on a particular vote. So if you have a city councillor who's accused of something, the voting members of the committee will include parish councillors. And if you're having a decision on a parish councillor, there will probably be nobody from that parish. There will be parish councillor or councillors from other parishes and city councillors who may also be parish councillors. So it's not a statutory committee of the City of York in a narrow sense. It's a joint committee which is statutory for the city, but presumably once it's been accepted, statutory for the parishes as well. So it's a combined body which has its own rules, I would venture to suggest. So that's a more complicated one than what is the precedent for the city. You'd also then say, well, what's the precedent for joint committees and what's the precedent for the parishes? Because it could be different, there could be several different answers to the same question if you fail to take into account this is a joint committee.
Thank you, Chair. Francis?
So, Chair, just to clarify, the Joint Standards Committee is under statutory regime, given responsibility for decision-making in parish matters, although I understand the point from the independent person to be that actually if you're worried about the independent person being non-representative, i.e. to the extent they are not a member of that authority, that is the mirror situation of when a parish councillor makes a decision in respect of a city councillor and vice versa. So the precedent, I think, is Mr. Lee's point, already exists. But in terms of what is the statutory scheme is that the joint committee of the unitary does have the jurisdiction to determine parish complaints. Parishes don't have their own standards committee which determine complaints under the Code of Conduct.
Thank you, Francis. Carol?
I think it's important. Oh, sorry, somebody's ringing me up. I think it's important we remember that we are representing councillors or parish councillors. We're not representing ourselves. I'm really sorry, I'll have to stop it doing it. That's it, it's gone. Right. Now try again. I can hear it, you can't. It's going into my hearing aids. So when I'm here, I'm not representing me or my group. I'm representing councillors, and parish councillors are not representing their parish council. They're representing all parish councils.
Okay. Councillor Kent?
So I'm unclear because the question as it stands doesn't refer to whether it just says should they. So that leaves the impression to me that it's open, that it could be legally, that it could be chaired by an independent person, in which case I'm not sure the sort of background legality is live. I think it's just, do we think they could? And I think my answer is they could. So that's where I'd remain.
Okay, thank you. Can I just ask, Francis, is it just City York Council that has this stipulation that chair has to be either parish council or city council? Or is it all local authorities that have that at the moment?
So the answer to that is, do I know whether other authorities have the stipulation that the Standards Committee should be chaired by an independent? I don't know the answer to that question, but ours doesn't stipulate it has to be chaired by an independent because self-evidently it isn't.
Okay, I just thought I'd check on that. Right, Tony?
Could I propose that we say no to question 9, but in question 10 say, but they could be if the committee chooses it?
I think that could be a good way around it. Members agreeable to that? Chair, if you are.
Sorry, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm just,
Sorry, sorry,
sorry,
Go on.
were you following up?
No, I was just.
I mean, obviously, that's my response. I'm just wondering about recording no. I would probably record unsure because this might be marked by some sort of, AI sort of, which will weight it a certain way if we put no, and I don't think it is no. I think it's a qualified answer.
right, so we'll put unsure for 9 and then in 10 we can put it in the text box. Okay. Well, you need some,
Just to clarify, I think the committee's response is they would like to say it could be as a matter of the local authority's discretion.
so we're trying to say it could be. Yeah, okay, right. So question 11. Should local authorities be required to publish annually a list of allegations of code of conduct breaches and any investigation outcomes? Yes, the public should have full access to all allegations and investigation outcomes. No, only cases in which a member is found guilty of wrongdoing should be published. And then there's the obligatory other option. Carol?
Definitely no. Having a very, very long time ago had an allegation made about me, which is I hadn't read the papers, which I had. I wouldn't want all that, particularly if it's thought to be malicious. I think if we have a member found guilty of wrongdoing, we do as we do now. I think it's right as it is now.
Thank you, Carol. Tony and then Joe.
Thank you. We have restricted all over the documents about particular individual identities, and they're only made public once a decision has been made to find somebody guilty. So no, I think we should only publish cases when there is proof of guilt. I mean, I had a case against me about 3 years ago where it was splashed all over the press long before there was any investigation or any hearing because somebody leaked it to the press. I don't know who, but it was distressing. And at the end of the day, I was found guilty of no wrongdoing, but my reputation was undoubtedly tarnished as a result of it. So no, we should only publish when somebody's found guilty.
Okay, Joe.
I would actually like to drop back to question 10, because I think one of the key things to have in here in relation to the discussion we're just having is there's got to be a better mechanism for stopping allegations at an early stage. This system that it goes to the monitoring officer. The monitoring officer has limited scope not to effectively to progress it on to a subcommittee. It's almost inevitable that, there are exceptions, but if there's any, even the narrowest of grounds for thinking there might be an issue, it ends up having to be progressed. And I would tend to the view that someone's may have something underneath them, but even if it were to be progressed, it should almost be chopped off at the first stage and saying this should only be looked at for resolution, not for investigation. And that's before it hits the subcommittee. Just something to ease back some of the very technical objections. The subcommittees or the committee can then see what those kind of cases were, but it hasn't resulted in things going around the houses several times before it reaches them. I mean, it doesn't affect me. It's not an issue that's close to my heart, but it does affect people against whom complaints are made. And some of them are limited in their scope, but I think would end up going beyond the monitoring officer and be put into the system because of, it just on a balance of probabilities, it needs to go on.
Councillor Kent.
I'm not sure if I've understood you correctly. I think I don't agree, in that I imagine there's some sort of screening that the monitor officer does if it's completely vexatious or technical or is going to go nowhere. And otherwise, I think that's a sort of I wouldn't want to extend that for all the reasons you don't let you want a full investigation. Otherwise, one person is effectively supplanting this committee. And if there's anything that can be done that can speed up the process and make it more timely, that would be great. But I don't think narrowing the decision to one person or increasing their powers is the way to do it.
Thank you. Councillor Breen.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Councillor Fisher and Runciman, actually, that I think the answer is no. Only cases in which a member is found guilty of wrongdoing should be published. If we said yes, the public should have full access to all allegations and investigation outcomes, then you are going to get cases where it never gets past the monitoring officer effectively. You know, it's out of scope or whatever that might be. So I think absolutely I agree. Being subject, not as serious as yours, Tony, but being the subject of a parishioner making an allegation against myself, then I would be happy for the outcome to be published because there was an outcome. But it might be, as I said previously, if it just doesn't get past, you know, the scrutiny, then why would we want the public to know?
Thank you. I've got Tony and get first, then you, Carol.
Thank you. I think part of the problem is the monitoring officer does have discretion in some cases, but the Constitution, it meant that all executive members, shadow executive members, chairs of committees, which I think included chairs of parish councils, had to proceed to the stage of involvement of this committee. Now, changes to the Constitution are removing that. I can't remember if we've passed that yet or whether it's been through or not, but I know there is a proposal to reduce drastically the scope of those who must go forward for the standards committee. And that I think will make things a lot better because they'll be far more filtered out to far earlier stages where in some cases you can tell the allegation is purely malicious or I would say vindictive in some cases.
Okay, Carol.
Knowing how the media pick up on things, if we published everything, then they would get hold of it very quickly and put it in the paper. And that, if it was an unfounded allegation or malicious one, as Tony just said, that would be very bad.
Thank you, Carol. Right. I think the feeling of the room is that no would be the option on question 11. Okay, we're moving to question 12. Should investigations into the conduct of members who stand down before a decision continue to their conclusion and the findings be published? Yes. Carol? Yeah, go on.
I think if those allegations are founded, then the results should be published. If they're not founded, obviously they shouldn't be. But if they are founded, because that person may want to stand again and it'll be on their record, and so it should be if it's been found to be true.
Thank you. So did you indicate, Tony?
Yeah, I don't know if you follow Andrew Teal's Britain Elect previews, but he has a what's called councillors behaving badly file on there. And it's amazing the number of councillors who are accused of serious misconduct who then stand down so the investigation can't happen, then suddenly miraculously reappear at the next election as a candidate and get elected again. So yeah, I think it should go through so that we know if they have been found guilty of wrongdoing. It's up to then the electors will know not to elect them again.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm agreeing with that, but the extreme example of that would be a parish council that stood down. There are vacancies on the parish council, and then they apply for a vacancy. Well, they stood down, but effectively they never really leave parish council. Now, of course, there's nothing you do about it, but does that, if you don't pursue it, you don't record it.
Okay.
I am aware of a parish council, not my own, where that very scenario happened, where the parish councillor accusations were made and found to be true, and they did exactly that. They stood down before it could get to a committee, but then after the next lot of elections there were vacancies and they applied, but the parish council does have the power to turn around and block. It's very rare that it happens, but to block somebody if they think that they are unsuitable other than the law, you know, been to prison and bankrupt, etc. They can, as long as they can explain it within their minutes as to why they do not want. They can't turn around and say, we don't want you, because I know we have had some complaints made about delays in co-opting people onto parish council. But if the parish council has got evidence that that person has been found guilty of whatever it might, serious misconduct, there is something that they can do to actually say, we're not going to have that person onto the parish council for that very reason. if that person who wants to be co-opted is unhappy, they're quite at liberty, if they think under the code of conduct they've been treated, they haven't been treated according to the code of conduct, which all parish councils have, then they can apply, they can put a complaint in.
Thank you. Francis?
I think there was a request from perhaps from the independent person that there was some clarification on whether parish councils can block members from becoming prospective members from becoming members of parishes. It's not something that I'm prepared to give a view on off the cuff, because I have never had cause to look into it and I'm not a parish clerk. If it's something that the committee would like me to come back with a definitive on, appreciate that Councillor Breen may have had experience of it. I can't confirm or deny from a legal perspective that that is the case.
Thank you. Tony?
Thank you. As a chair of a parish council who's had to deal with this on a number of occasions, the situation is that if a member applies to a co-opted position and there is a vacancy, then there is an obligation to take that person unless there has been a proven case of misconduct against them, or you feel that they have carried out acts that are prejudicial to the good reputation of the council. So it have to be something pretty serious. So on general, there is no block to somebody coming on. And I had to explain that to a parish clerk a while ago. Unfortunately.
Thank you, Tony. Councillor?
Very quickly, having discussed this with our parish clerk, one of my two, I can say that there are contrary views. I won't go any further, but there are contrary views.
Thank you. So on question,
Yes, I think.
what you go, yes, yes. Francis says we feel that the answer to question 12 is a yes. No, with that. Right, moving on. Question 13. If responding as a local authority, what is the average number of complaints against elected members you receive over a 12-month period? So obviously, yes.
Yeah, in terms of the average, if we take the last 3 years. Yeah.
Okay. Then question 13A, it's the same, yes.
It's a bureaucrat to me, if I just feel, and you presumably have to list that separately between city councillors and parish councillors, would you, for the informer to remind people you're doing both? Otherwise, they might look like there's a huge number of, somebody misreads it, huge number of complaints about the city because it's the statutory authority, but actually it's much more spread than that.
You can answer yes, yeah.
Yes, Chair, interesting point. We do, for the purposes of our annual report, differentiate between parish and city complaints. However, I noticed that what is being asked for here is an average number of complaints dealt with by the local authority, and it's a pure number box. Again, if it's a situation where I can note what the difference, what the balance is, I'll find a way to do that, because we will have that. It's an interesting point, but worst case scenario, we will be reflecting the total number, which is a mixture, and just inviting members to endorse the concept of a 3-year average.
Actually worth leaving out because they're all seem to be filling in boxes.
Yes, good point, Chair. Don't just introduce that, so those that seem personal,
Right.
those from a corporate perspective.
Okay, so the next few questions is obviously individual, or personal questions for individual. Are we happy if we just sort of leave that and move on to the next one? That's the problem with these wonderful forms. Right, I think the next one that we can answer as a committee is question 18. Do you think local authorities should be given the power to suspend elected members for serious code of conduct breaches? I think that's a unanimous yes. Okay,
Yes.
question 19. Do you think it's appropriate for a standards committee to have the power to suspend members, or should this be the role of an independent body?
Oh,
Deathly silence.
sorry, the standards committee, because they know what's gone on.
Okay. Councillor
There is
Fisher.
a slight issue here, because at the moment we do have the right to recommend that a councillor be suspended, but only from subcommittees and external
that's right.
appointments. You
That's right.
cannot, at the moment, suspend somebody from meetings of full council. So there is a slight uncertainty as to exactly what they mean here.
Francis?
Bearing in mind the publicity around this consultation, I'm going to go out on a limb and say this is about the power to impose a wholesale suspension as there used to be prior to the Localism Act. And I think it's fairly clear that what's being referred to is the former, the independent body, the concept of Standards Board for England, which did exist prior to the Localism Act 2011.
Yeah,
I would take a view there has to be a right to appeal, and the right to appeal should go to an independent body. So that's the way you link the two. I think you do it internally by decision by the statutory body's relevant body, but a councillor would have a right to appeal should they wish to exercise it, because you'll end up in the High Court otherwise.
nice. Carol?
Thank you. The thing that's always bothered us about this is actually in the next question, which is you've got to have your residents represented. And the next question, question 20, is trying to answer that. If you say somebody can't come to any meetings and can't represent the views of those residents, there needs to be some way of getting those residents in that ward represented. That's what that one is doing.
Any thoughts on question 19 before we move on?
I can just summarise what I think we've got there.
Yeah, far away. Yeah, far away.
So the response I think we've got for 19 before we move on is yes, there should be, and enter into the free text box if this is supported by the committee, it came from the independent person, that there should be a right of appeal to an independent body.
Yeah, happy with that? Okay. So question 20, we've already sort of stumbled onto a bit. So where it is deemed that suspension is an appropriate response for the code of conduct breach, should local authorities be required to nominate an alternative point of contact for constituents during their absence?
There are 6 wards that have single members, almost of
Yeah,
There are only a very small number of wards here that are single members, so that nearly everybody would have an alternative point. So
Okay.
it shouldn't be too onerous for those 6 single member wards to arrange a point of contact.
okay, thank you. Anyone else? No? Joe, sorry.
Just again, the bureaucrat in me, as to whether you formalise the system by saying if there is a suspension, then this is the formal mechanism by which someone will be identified. You choose the mechanism you want, but there needs to be a standard mechanism. Otherwise, you're going to get squabbles about why someone is seen as representing somebody. So you would, I think the free text would be, but it would have to be by a standard mechanism.
Okay, Councillor Kent?
Sorry, this is a question because I don't know the answer. How long is the maximum suspension for 6 months? Okay.
6 months.
I'm being told there isn't apparently there isn't one at the
Well,
moment.
sorry, I didn't realize it was ahead, but it's partly because I'm wondering, that's relevant to me, whether I think there needs to be a separate process for individuals. If it's 6 months, I think it should.
Yeah, Francis, yeah.
So at the moment, there isn't a power to suspend. Councillor Fisher spoke earlier about the ability to take somebody off an outside body or something like that, which does exist. But in terms of just being absolutely clear, there is no power to suspend wholesale 6 months, 3 months, or otherwise. It's just not there.
Thank you, Francis. Anyone else? This one. Councillor Kent again.
Sorry, in which case then my answer is yes.
Okay.
20.
Thanks. Anybody else? Any reasons? Or we're going for yes? Okay. Right, question 21. Should the government reintroduce the power of suspension? Do you think there should be a maximum length of suspension, which is what we were talking about? And the options are yes, maximum length of suspension is 6 months. Yes, should have a different maximum length and it asks for options in months, and then obviously there's no, and then there's unsure. So what do members feel? Carol?
I'll start it off again. I think 6 months is plenty. And before we leave this one, it's likely to be used very infrequently, which is the next one.
Right, and also still option agreeing heads. So I think 6 months. Okay. So question 22, I think we're on the same one there. So if yes, how frequently do you consider council will be likely to make the use of the maximum length of suspension? And as you say, probably highly infrequently, I would have thought. Probably regret saying that in future, but there you go. Question 23, should local authorities have the power to withhold allowances from suspended councillors in cases where they deem it appropriate? Is that yes? I think we'll all agree it's a yes. Okay, 24. Do you think it should be put beyond doubt that local authorities have the power to ban suspended councillors from council premises and withdraw use of council facilities in cases where they deem it appropriate? Yeah, so yes, okay. And question 25, do you agree that the power to withhold members' allowances and to implement premises and facilities bans should also be standalone sanctions in their own right? Yes, no, or unsure. So Joe first, then Councillor Kent.
I think what I was going to get at is it actually relates this back again to an earlier question, which is if somebody is suspended for a long period of time and if somebody is making cover arrangements, one reason we would be removing the allowances is you need to put some funding in to make sure you're providing proper cover for someone. I don't know how you would do it, not my bag, but you know, if somebody's having to do a load of additional work, even if it's clerical support or administrative support, it seems like you ought to do something, otherwise they may be in a position they can't do it as well as they would wish to do it.
Okay, Councillor Kent, then Councillor.
Yeah. Thank you. I think this question is I think we've covered that in the previous question, if I'm not wrong, but this question is, should we be able to implement premises and facilities ban as a standalone sanction? And I'm slightly unsure, does that mean even when someone's not suspended as an alternative to suspension? Yeah.
Been told,
Yeah.
we think that it is because it does exist at the moment.
In which case I'd say no, because I think I'm not sure on what basis would say, let's withhold your payment for doing a job if we're not preventing you from doing the job.
Councillor Huntsman.
I think it's a difficult one because they will still, even if people are suspended, they will still get representations from residents to do whatever they needed. And it's all very well for me. I don't have any council equipment and haven't had, but if you only have a council laptop, say, and then you can't respond to your residents or even receive emails from them, then you've got a big problem because nobody else will be able to access them and find out what's going on.
Okay. Anyone else? I think there's one. No as an answer for this one. Okay. All right, on to question 26. Do you think the power to suspend councillors on an interim basis pending the outcome of an investigation will be an appropriate measure? Tony?
No, innocence until proven guilty. Unless it's a sexual allegation or something like that, or some serious breach of the law.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Okay. So question 27.
So
Sorry.
we're saying yes, Al, it's 26.
Saying yes, yes, sorry. Yeah. So question 27, do you agree that local authorities should have the power to impose premises and facility bans on councillors suspended on an interim basis? I'm sure we just had this question a minute ago. Yeah. So yes, no, or sure, what was councillors?
Oh, sorry, I said yes, but I didn't. I should have put my hand up first. Sorry.
That's all right. So
I'm going with Tony's idea that you're innocent until you're proved guilty.
okay. So that's a no then. We agreed on no, on the no. Right. Okay.
Sorry, Chair.
Apologies. Yeah. I
Yeah,
don't know.
Just in the verbiage, assuming there is one for this, but to make the reminder, I think it was Tony who was saying, but somebody was, other than certain extreme cases, you mentioned sexual offences, for example, then you might then wish you were putting in, you've got this problem of defining them and defining what you mean, but you may then have issues about preventing people going into premises. So it's an almost absolute no, but if you're giving yourself exceptions to not intermediate banning, then you probably need exceptions to anything that reflects an interim punishment, penalty, whatever.
Okay,
Could
thanks,
Francis
Jill.
put that in the free text box for the next question?
In 28.
Okay, so, sorry, councillor Kent.
Sorry, I think if we're not, if we're having interim suspensions pending outcome, I think we just have that, that has to be blanket. I don't know if we all agreed on that. I wouldn't start to define which, exceptions. I think it's just no.
Sorry,
Can we just
Francis.
recap then? I think we've got 26 as yes, 27 as no. Is that right? Is that right?
Yeah, sorry, Tony.
I believe the council does have the right to ban a member from the premises if it's on a public safety grounds, because I
Yeah.
believe that happened during the 2015 to 2019 when there was a serious case of violence against a member, and the member was only allowed in with the presence of a security guard accompanying them all times. So I think we have to put things in place to protect the public, which I think is important.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Right. So I've lost track of where we're up
We
to.
need to do 28. as the
28.
Length of the.
Right, so it's question 28. Do you think councils should be able to impose an interim suspension for any period of time they deem fit?
Can you imagine? No, it's not.
Yes, that's a no then, right. So moving on to question 29. Do you agree that an interim suspension should initially be for a period for up to a maximum of 3 months and then subject to review?
28.
Yeah.
Sorry, I forgot my microphone. So in view of the fact 28 was saying no, then 29, the answer is no as well, I think.
I don't see the logic of that.
I think not necessarily, but we might think no. I mean, I think it's that you might want to say that you want to extend it for a further 3 months because it's a complex investigation. I'm not sure I agree with that, but I think that's not the same as an indefinite period of time.
Okay. Yeah.
It's really, it's the reciprocal of what Councillor Kent just said, which is, what is the defence for the councillor of being suspended for very, very lengthy periods of time? In some cases, in other circumstances, if it isn't dealt with by X, or the process isn't along with those completion by X, it's enforced to be dropped because the person is being placed in jeopardy for a long period of time. So if you suspend someone on an interim basis for 3 months, then suspend them again for another 3 months, and the most you're ever likely to do is to suspend them for 6 months, then something strange is happening here. What is the defence, rule that goes in about the abuse of power thing?
Right, Francis mentions that if we look at question 30, it might be covered by what's in question 30.
If it helps, I don't know if we're all agreed. My answer would be no to 29, and therefore that answers 30.
Yes.
That's when you clock on.
Yeah, the thing you're right there, Councillor Kent, yeah. Anyone else on questions 29 and 30, and 38?
Are we covered this side of the room as well?
Yes,
Are we?
it's gone very quiet on this side of the room. Right, Rose, yeah,
With the
yeah.
no,
That's a no,
with the no on 30 as well.
and no on 30, yeah,
Is that right?
yes. And 38 only applies if we said yes. Right, over the page, question 31. Do you think councillors should be disqualified if subject to suspension more than once? And then the options you've got are yes, twice within a 5-year period to result in qualification for 5 years. Yes, but in a different length of time, and or within a different time frame in years, and then no or any other. Do members think on that?
I'll talk again, no. I think that the power to suspend members should sit with the standards committee, and if people get suspended twice, then they just do, and everybody will know about it.
Anyone else? Joe.
One of the problems here is they're talking about the rules being changed and the powers being changed. You're trying to answer a question by trying to guess what the circumstances might be on the ground. So if you end up with a situation where you can suspend someone for 1 month, or you can suspend them for 6 months, if you twice suspend somebody for 1 month, it's rather different than if you've twice suspended them for 6 months. So if you think about suspending somebody for 1 month, 4 years down after you previously suspended them for 2 months, that seems slightly different than if somebody's been suspended for 6 months twice within 18 months. So it's the objective comparison of things. One kind of suspension might be different to another kind of suspension.
Okay, yeah, good point. So.
Yeah, question 31 says, do you think councillors should be disqualified if subject to suspension more than once? My never having been particularly in the sense of a ward councillor, although I know we're not just talking about ward councillors, we're talking about parish councillors as well. But if you've got somebody that has been suspended for a 6-month period for a particular breach, and they do exactly the same within a certain length of time, they obviously haven't learned their lesson, have they, the first time round? So I wouldn't be happy to say no. The power to suspend members whenever they breach codes of conduct is sufficient. You could just keep on giving them suspensions, and they'll just, think back, guys, to some other cases that we've had where we haven't had any of these powers. They'll just, that person will just keep doing it until we turn around and say, well, actually, enough is enough. That's my view.
Rose.
I'm not sure if it's applicable to this question, but perhaps more generally, in the comments, could we make some suggestion about the need for support and training alongside, the sanctions and things that we're talking about as well? Just as a general,
Yeah, that's good. Tony and then Carol.
Thank you. I think that's a very, very important point. One of the things we suggested earlier that we support is forcing members to engage with the standards process, which I think is extremely important because we know there are some members who will not do that. I think it's equally important that if training, for example, is suggested as a sanction, then the member in concern should be forced to undergo that training, and they will not be readmitted to the council until such time as they've undertaken that training. That's another issue which is perhaps not directly relevant to this, but I think it's a critical point because I know that training has been offered to one councillor who was found guilty of a fairly serious breach, and the person didn't pay any attention to it. So,
Carol.
Just a quick comment on what Tony said and then my comment. I think forcing anybody to do training doesn't necessarily mean they've got their heart in it, to put it mildly. What bothers me in this question and the next question is we're not talking about suspending people now. We're talking about disqualifying them. Why has the terminology changed? Do we really have the power to disqualify somebody for standing, perhaps, because 5 years would? Or is this still talking about suspension? And that's what bothers me. I don't know why we're suddenly talking about disqualification in this question and the next question, and we weren't talking about it before.
Thank you, Chair. So I think this is the next step on from should cumulative suspensions then be introduced? So we know what the legal provisions are around disqualification, and it's failure to attend a meeting for 6 months, it's certain criminal offences, but they are quite rarely met. Disqualification provisions are rarely met. I think what the consultation is moving on to consider is should cumulative suspensions be a reason added to that statutory list of reasons for disqualification. As I understood it, we didn't have a consensus in the room. I think the initial opinion on this side of the room was no. It was up to voters, actually. If they had someone who was continually suspended and were well aware of it because it had been publicised, they can continue to elect them if they so wish. You can't stop them from standing or being a councillor. And then there was an alternative view on this side of the room that should effectively you're taking that choice away from electors. So conscious that we haven't reached a consensus in the room to answer the question, but I think it's clear that it's moving on to the next logical thought stage of, should it be a reason to add to that statutory list of disqualifications, multiple suspensions?
Thank you, Francis. Councillor Kent.
Thank you. My answer is yes. Otherwise, yeah, you need a final stage.
Which, yes.
Sorry,
So,
question 31. I think if you're suspended twice within a 5-year period, it should result in disqualification for 5 years,
okay.
precisely for the point that it stops you from standing again. Otherwise, this doesn't achieve anything in the end.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kent. Councillor Fisher.
I'm mindful to agree with that. I won't go into the specific details, but I can think of a case when that would have been appropriate.
Okay,
I would agree with that if people have had 2 long suspensions. I'm a little more nervous if somebody's had 2 short suspensions. And that's the difficulty of quantifying what it means. But I am conscious that someone could have been suspended a couple of times, has been an awkward individual, and it's rather different than where you're saying this has been a fundamental breach of their responsibilities as a councillor, and they've been suspended, if not for 6 months, for 5 months or 4 months, twice. I think that's a different scenario. And then I would agree that banning them is reasonable.
okay. Councillor Fisher, then Councillor
Could I
Kent.
then perhaps suggest we put in the free text box a slight alternative? If a councillor is suspended for a total of 12 months during 5
Yeah,
years.
that's putting a number on it.
So putting a number on it, so it's not just 2 suspensions, which might be for a month, which result in them being disqualified. But if they have persistent, ones which total 12 months within 5 years, that
Yeah,
would
it could
result
be
in
3 or
suspension.
4, but it adds up to 12 months.
Councillor Kent.
So this is really hard to quantify, isn't it? Because I see the point, and I'm sorry, I should have reflected that. I was thinking of the most serious disqualification for the most serious breach, but are we in a position to say that we think it should be 12 months? I mean, it might be 11 months or 10 months. It depends. Actually, this is your point. It is not all breaches the same. So I think I would just want to raise that and ask and say that there's a mix of views about. It has to be for the more serious breaches. You shouldn't be suspended for 1 month or 2 months. I'd say possibly anything over 4 months, but that's a personal view, and I don't know what those 4 months would reflect on the ground until we start looking at how it's enacted.
Yes, Francis.
So it looks like, from purpose of capturing a response then, is that we could tick yes for a different length of time, the concept of disqualification, but then add in the any other comments, debate around what would amount to sufficient reason, and should it be a cumulative amount of suspended time? Question mark 12 months, not quite sure, but 2 suspensions of 1 month are not equal to 2 suspensions of 6 months, and this was noted by the committee.
Okay, so I feel that we're moving towards the second yes on that list on question 31. Are we agreed on that? And then what Francis is saying? Question 32, if there's a case for an immediate disqualification for gross misconduct, for example, in instances of theft or physical violence impacting on the safety of other members and or officers, provided there's been an investigation of the incident and the member has a chance to respond before a decision is made, yes, no, or unsure. I can see why Councillor Rowley wanted me to share this.
Yes, I
Comment,
thought,
didn't
I
it?
think you're doing ever so well. My answer would be yes.
Councillor Breen.
I absolutely agree.
I hate to be put in
Yeah.
a position of keep defending the position of a councillor who's been accused of something, but here we go again. If we are carrying out a disciplinary process, at what point can someone be immediately disqualified for gross misconduct? How can they be disqualified for gross misconduct unless it's from a very narrow range of pre-specified things without having had some kind of judicial activity which sits behind the decision? Yeah. So, right. Okay. So if you've made a decision, then you made a decision that you decide whether they're immediately disqualified, but they have a right to appeal, presumably, or they don't, and they have a right to appeal. If they have a right to appeal, immediate disqualification doesn't seem such a problem.
Sorry, Councillor Kent, and then Councillor Moore.
I mean, this might be understood, but I would want to know. I'd want a definition of gross misconduct for this.
Yeah.
I assume it's the same as in HR, but I'd want that to be clear.
Yeah, I agree with that. So were you indicating? No, Councillor Fisher.
I'm veer towards no on this because I think disqualification, the suspension is the first stage. Suspension followed by full investigation would be a better process personally. But that's my view. I think disqualification straight away, unless it's criminal, seriously criminal, in which case they could well get a prison sentence, which would disqualify them anyway. Police could be involved. So I think I'm inclined to say immediate disqualification is probably just going a little bit up.
Okay, back to Councillor Kent.
My pause on that is that you could be in a situation where someone's been convicted and is a criminal, but is still standing as a suspended councillor or is still a councillor. So I think there is a case for immediate disqualification if someone has which is a separate matter to criminal proceedings. I think it's it's a council position. So I think there is a case for it. In those, that's why I want a definition, for example, of a criminal conviction. I would probably say less than that, but that would be the long stop.
Okay, Francis.
Except that certain criminal matters would result legislatively in disqualification. Some wouldn't, and it's something I should be able to quote, but thankfully it doesn't happen very often. But I can't cite what they are. If it's pertinent to the committee's response, I will be sure to look it up and give you it before the end of the committee. What councillor is going to tell me what it is?
Well, obviously, if a councillor is given a suspended or prison sentence of 3 months or more, that is automatic disqualification. Ironically, MPs can be a year, up to a year, and they don't get automatically disqualified. It has to go to a recall petition. So there's no disqualification of MPs who have served time in prison. And there have been a number of cases where MPs have gone to prison for short times and then been able to resume their duties. So I think we just need to be a little bit careful on that. The other question, of course, is whether or not if a councillor is convicted of a serious offence, should there be a recall petition as there are for MPs? But that's another issue.
Thank you, Tony.
I think there might be some issue around the delay in the police process as well. It might take 2 years to come to a conviction, so the statutory provision doesn't click in.
Right, so yes, there's legal issues there, right? Thank you, Carol.
I think there's a conflict between talking about immediate disqualification and talking about having an investigation first. And I'm not, perhaps that does need mentioning. If it's theft or physical violence, and you've got to wait for an investigation, then it's not an immediate disqualification.
Thank you. Councillor Kent.
So I think just so I'm clear in my mind, I have my understanding of this would be instead of only having a power to suspend, you could go straight to immediate disqualification if on the outcome of the investigation it was found to be gross misconduct.
Rose.
The way I'm reading that is that gross misconduct has already been established. So if it's already been established, then there wouldn't be the need for a further investigation to delay things. You'd just be able to make the decision on if it an agreed and proven case of gross misconduct.
Okay, Francis.
Thank you, Chair. I'd be inclined to agree with the interpretation being offered by the IP, and I think that is allowing for a delay in a police and criminal court process. So I think it's effectively saying, can you supplant the concept of having to wait for a police and criminal investigation to impose a 3-month or more sentence, which would trigger the legislative disqualification on current rules. Is there a case for there being a thorough process, more locally, more speedily, which results in disqualification? I think it's about that delay that can be inbuilt in reach, because you could wait years for a matter to come to trial and then a 3 months triggering sentence be imposed and disqualification happen a long time after the event.
Thank you, Francis. All right, so question 32. What are we putting down here? Because we've been going around the room a bit here. Councillor Kent.
My view is yes, so long as I know what the definition of gross misconduct is.
Yeah,
Have we got a consensus?
I think consensus, yes, right, yeah.
Oh, we don't, but we've got a majority. Do you want to take a vote?
Yeah, those in favour, so of yes. 4. Against. 1.
In the free text, I can record it wasn't unanimous. Yeah.
Yeah, please do so. Right, question 33, I think. Should members have the right to appeal the decision to suspend them? Yes. Yeah, okay.
Biggest fault with the current system is that there is no right of appeal.
Okay, so I think we're all agreed on yes for that one. Question 34, should suspended members have to make their appeal within a set time frame? And again, you've got two yeses here. So either yes within 5 days of the decision is appropriate to ensure an official process, or yes within a different time frame. Councillor Kent.
I'd say yes in a different time frame. I think 5 days is too short.
I'd probably.
28 days max, 14 days would probably be my view.
Okay,
Joe. Different time frames, because some things you want to do quite quickly and wouldn't be a normal time frame. But because of the reality of the situation you're facing, you might want to allow a back step to determine, so a normally determined thought when extreme circumstances. Sometimes I can do it timely, but normally should be a relatively short period of time. But before that, it's a longer period of time.
So I thought Councillor Breen's hand.
Yeah.
Then and Councillor Breen, then Councillor.
Yeah. I was going to suggest we could leave it open as to the number of days. I will go with whatever people feel. 28 days to me seem to be appropriate. If you work in the public sector, if you're found guilty of something, I'm a retired civil servant. The usuals was you got 28 days to do it, but I'm not. If we don't want to give a number of days, I'm quite happy with that. But I think 14 seems a bit short. You know, if you're going to write an appeal, it's going to take a little while. You might want to get some legal advice or whatever. So, but I'm not fixed on the number of days.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Osman.
Yeah, I'd agree with Councillor Kent. I think that there should be a right of appeal, and it should be within 14 days.
I would concur with 14 days. I think that's sufficient time for people to put a appeal together.
Okay. Right, I think the majority view is 14 days. Okay. Right, where are we? What was the last one I did? Was it 32?
We're on 35 now.
35, losing track. Right, okay, so question to 35. Do you consider that a complainant should have the right to appeal when a decision is taken not to investigate their complaint? No? No. Okay.
Do you want me to?
Sorry, Karen.
No, I don't think so. I can't imagine the standards board's going to tie itself up in knots. What you would do in a court is you'd have a different bench. We haven't got the possibility. You'd be asking the same people to consider their decision again. So I would say no in that one.
Okay. Great, I think it's no on that one then. Question 36. Do you consider that a complainant should have the right to appeal when an allegation of misconduct is not upheld? No? Okay. I'm sure we are getting towards the end of this. Question 37, yeah, we don't have to do the next one. Hooray. No, sorry.
I'm unsure about that.
Councillor Kent.
Completely take the resources point, but from a purely from a sort of jurisprudence point, that yeah, no, okay, I'll go with it.
Okay, on to question 38. Do you think there is a need for an external national body to hear appeals?
This one gave me the most food for thought, really. I think that appeals should be local, because I think a lot of the things that we hear are very local, very much related to an area, and an external body would have to be a local body to satisfy me, and not a national body. And I think it could be an internal panel, but it's the same as I just said. You've got to have different people doing it. You can't have the same people hearing it all over again.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else on that one? Joe?
Sorry, it's just the resource implications of doing something internally. One advantage, if you had the equivalent of like a regional body, representatives of some councils. Sorry, one advantage of it being, the disadvantage of internally, as I can see, is the resource implication. I don't know how it would happen, but if you're going to get a few of them, if there were if there were a joint body, in the same way as there's a joint internal body here, where people from a few local authorities would be making up a panel, that should satisfy regionalism, relatively localism, independence, and not potentially putting an impossible burden on an individual organisation's internal systems.
Thank you, Joe. Anyone else? Councillor Brunson first and then Councillor Kent.
I think Joe has a good point. Adjoining local authorities, you could do it with. But I do think that local knowledge is absolutely crucial if there's going to be any sort of appeal panel. We do have appeal panels already and they work quite well, corporate appeals and so on. So it is possible to do it, but I think it perhaps needs to be a mixture of the authority and those people, you know, if you're going to have that sort of thing, they need to be elected at council.
Councillor Kent.
I think it should not be local because I think it should be a national body, because I think by the time you've got to the appeal stage, you need true independence, and the case will have been, you know, it needs to be taken to the next level or away from it for the same reason that retrials are heard by not just a different judge in the same court centre, but a different court centre. You need, you know, you need a proper impartiality, and that's the way you'd guarantee it. I think it doesn't matter. I'm not saying it has to be in London. It should be regional. It could be, but it just not York, not the same members or.
Okay, thank you, Tony.
There is the practical problem that whenever we put together a panel, we're always fishing in a relatively small pond anyway. So sometimes, bearing in mind that some councillors may have conflicts of interest because of their association with the subject councillor, it may be actually fundamentally difficult to put a different panel together. That could be a problem.
Okay, so which answer are we going for on this one?
We don't know.
So my vote is yes, there should be an external body. That's just my vote.
Okay, right, so I think we'll have to go for a vote on this. Those want to vote yes? You sure?
I thought Councillor Kent was a yes.
Councillor Kent was yes, but nobody else is. One. No.
If I had a vote, I would be saying yes.
Anybody else got any opinion either way? No. So one yes so far at the moment.
But again, there's a free text box, so we can
Free text.
allocate.
It's a very, very balanced.
Right. Which brings us to question 39, which is, if you think there's a need for an external national body, do you think it should be limited to the hearing the elected appeals members, be limited to hearing claimants' appeals? Or,
No claimants appeal, so it doesn't apply. So
Okay.
it's limited to
right,
elected
I
members.
think we're nearly there. I think there's one question left if I'm reading this right.
Question 40,
Question 40. Hurrah. In your view, would the proposed reforms in local government standards and conduct framework particularly benefit or disadvantage individuals with protracted characteristics such as those with disabilities or caring responsibilities? Please tick an option below. It would benefit individuals with protected characteristics, or it would disadvantage individuals with protected characteristics, or neither.
I should jolly well hope not. You know, we're very careful with protected characteristics, and that would apply in this situation too. And I think that certainly here we're very aware and we have training on protected characteristics. So I would hope it wouldn't benefit them or disadvantage them either in any way.
Okay, thank you, Carol. Anyone else? No? Neither, right. I think we're there. Right. So I think we can actually move on to the next item. But we won't review the work plan first.
And of course,
Yes. So agenda item 9 is a review of the work plan, which I think is just to go if there's anything jumped out that you think we should be adding beyond what's already there. No?
It's a question. When the results come back, I'm sure we'd all be very interested to know what they are. So if you can find out when they're due back and stick them on the work plan in the appropriate place, I think that would be good. And then we can see if the world agrees with us or disagrees with us.
Yes. Thank you, Francis. Right. So we've done, so work plan, we're quite happy with. Sorry,
To just ask a question, the last meeting, we were supposed to have somebody coming from YLCA. But I don't think she could make it. Are we still planning on issuing an invite? Because it's been crossed through.
right, on the.
Oh, right, it's on the
work plan
bottom
there,
bit, sorry.
The March meeting, let's say YLCA representative, so fingers crossed.
Okay, all right then, sorry.
No, it's all right.
I misread it, I'm sorry.
So I missed it
Thank you,
too the
Mike.
first time around. Right, on to item 10, the monitoring report. Now, obviously, this is in two parts, the public part and then the bit we want to go into a private session. So we'll start with the public part. So Francis, anything you want to say on the public part?
Chair, I don't think there's anything I can really flesh out than what's been published unless there are any questions from members.
Any questions on the public part of the agenda on this item? Joe?
I don't think it's a problem, but a thought that I have based on a meeting recently being cancelled is it possible, even though the dates might then end up being killed, to timetable a session every month where you see if you might be able to bring together members of this committee's to find a hearing panel, because of the difficulty of finding dates of ringing around at the time. Does anything have to be really determined? So the meeting has to be done the next week or the next fortnight, or could they sometimes work better if a meeting which would be cancelled out and free up time for councillors, great, but where they would keep it as a possible commitment. So you're not running around all the time trying to find councillors close to the time.
Francis?
Thank you, Chair. If the question is, can it be done? Well, it is done. There is a precedent for that in
Yeah.
terms of calling meetings. They are in the diary and taken out if not needed. I thought Jane was giving me a look that was going to contradict me, but I believe that's the case. I think it's a matter of convenience that works. What works for members, independent persons, and what works for Dem services who have the job of doing ringing around. There's no objection in principle to doing it that way. It's an idea to thrash around, I think.
Thank you, Francis. Right, anything else on the public part of this item? And if not, we're ready, we'll go and close the webcam. Sorry?
No.
I want to just let the viewers.
Right, so those of you who've been watching on webcast or YouTube or whatever we're watching on, thank you for watching. We're now going to private session.